The tendency of mechanic techniques of visualization and recognition to type and classify human faces has in fact very ancient roots. It's linked to the millenary tradition of physiognomics. If we consider the privileged role that the face has always played in the perception of a person, it's not surprising that the same has been considered over time a sort of synecdoche of the body, meaning a part indicating the whole. If we consider the privileged role that the face has always played in the perception of a person, it's not surprising that the same has been considered over time a sort of synecdoche of the body, meaning a part indicating the whole nerve center of human expression and communication. So, what today is increasingly becoming a prerogative of machines is in fact one of the most common and ancient operations of man. The attempt at reading and analyzing the face of an individual to trace his true identity. The similarity that binds this ancient discipline to the new machine vision techniques, the automatic extraction of information from digital images, is twofold. On the one hand, in fact, it shares the same type of guiding principle for face analysis, the attention to the eyes, shape, the size of the skull, the distance of the ears, those facial features on which the eigenface technique lays its foundations, which connects them to medical semiotics and anatomy paradigms. On the other hand, both actually try to trace an identity not as a simple identification of the individual, but as the bearer in itself of a whole series of information on the same individual: habits, interests, passions, temperaments, relationships. All this information, which today passes through the metadata inherent in the digital photographs that portray us thanks to the analysis of our activities on the web, according to the discipline of physiognomics, were equally deductible through the observation of the physical characteristics and phenotypic traits of the individual. Always characterized by the theoretical ambivalence of being a pseudoscience, halfway between semantics and medicine, and often mistakenly reduced to the mere search for a naive correspondence between the visible exterior, the body, the face, and the invisible interior, the soul, the character, physiognomics actually has a history of very different positions, polarized between the extremes of individual expression and of a universal stereotype. Descended from the Greek concept of kalokagatia, contraction of the Greek kalos kaiagatzos, beautiful and good, according to which there was an inevitable harmonious combination of body, morals and spirit, which is also why gods and heroes were of good looks and perfect proportions. Physiognomics has its first theoretical roots in the homonymous pseudo-Aristotelian work. For Greek culture, in fact, all human knowledge was based on physiognomics, physis, nature, and gnosis, knowledge, derived from the physiognomia of reality, or from deducing through the senses of morphogenetic observation of nature. Its intrinsic law of becoming in action, which also included man as a conscious part of a natural law. From here, the text will return to circulate only in the Middle Ages, where it will represent a starting point of a wide school debate. Passing through the Florentine genius of Leonardo, who firmly rejected the union of the subject with astrology to favor instead a strong connection with anatomy, thus revealing his intimate desire to find, through his drawings, a correspondence between the physical structures of the body and the motion of the human soul. In modern age, we'll find particular luck with Giovanni Battista della Porta and Charles Le Brun. Della Porta was the predecessor of the anthropometric line which, from the craniometry elaborated in the second half of the 18th century by the Dutch anatomist Peter Camper and the phrenology of Franz Joseph Gall, goes as far as the criminology of Cesare Lombroso and the photosignage of Bertillon. Extending the concept of physiognomics to the animal world, the scholar first tried to find a logical explanation for the criminal temperaments of prisoners, through the observation of their profiles and a comparison of them to different species of animals. According to Della Porta, the similarity found in the comparison between the face of the former and the muzzle of the latter was in fact an indication of an inevitably similar character and natural predisposition. To carry out his work, he himself visited many public prisons, where a great multitude of monsters, street murderers and other men of similar fate are always enclosed. The true initiation of what was later called criminal anthropology is, however, considered Lombroso. Starting from a materialist conception of man, he was the first to investigate the reasons for the mental deviance of the madman or the moral degeneration of the delinquent by applying a quantitative experimental method aimed at finding to these behaviors the corresponding physical anomalies, the so-called Lombrosian degenerative characters. His ideas, ranging from forensic medicine to anthropology and to prison disciplines, were widely disseminated, especially among sociologists and jurists, favoring the birth of the positive school of criminal law. A further step in the field of criminology took place in the same years in France, when the chief of police in Paris, Bertillon, added to the special attention already paid to the particular traits of the faces of criminals the importance of their memorization. Thus, it was born the Bertillon system, or Bertillonage, or modern photo signage. By integrating the already elaborate method of fingerprints, this system allowed a faithful description and therefore a consent identification and cataloging of criminals, thanks to the visual recording of their salient somatic traits. The faces portrayed in this portrait parlé were photographed frontally and in profile, standardizing lighting, angles and measurements. This is how the first biometric traits, now called soft biometrics, were discovered and formalized. The analogy with modern facial recognition systems is evident, systems that are gradually replacing, even in the judicial field, the work that has always been scrupulously conducted by the human eye. However, although the new vision techniques bring a considerable advantage in the recognition of individuals in terms of speed and accuracy, it's not necessary to fall into the naive error of blindly relying on the results produced by the mechanic elaborations. The accuracy of the machine, dependent on a multitude of different factors, is in fact subject to many variables to be considered infallible. Even if the mechanic vision is rapidly developing, the vision of a man remains richer and more complex, still too difficult to emulate it, as well as enriched by an essential and irreproducible human sensitivity. Even the mechanic vision is constantly and rapidly developing, the vision of a man remains richer and more complex, still too difficult to emulate, as well as enriched by an essential and irreproducible human sensitivity. Delegating judgments and sentences completed to an artificial intelligence system cloud does reveal itself as very dangerous. A striking example is the software developed for the prediction of future criminals, proven, thanks to the study conducted by ProPublica, distorted and diverted by racial bias. The collection and use of biometric data for remote identification purposes, for example through the deployment of facial recognition systems in public places, carries specific risks to fundamental rights. The use of AI systems for remote biometric identification has fundamental rights implications that vary greatly depending on the purpose, context and scope for their use. European data protection rules prohibit in general the processing of biometric data in order to uniquely identify a natural person, with few exceptions subject to certain conditions. In particular, under the GDPR, such processing can only be carried out for a limited number of reasons, mainly for reasons of relevant public interest. In such a case, processing must be carried out on the basis of union or member state law, comply with the requirement of proportionality and the essence of the right to data protection, and provide to appropriate protection measures. Under the Directive on the Protection of Data in Police and Judicial Activities, such processing must be strictly necessary, authorized in principle by European or Member State law, and subject to adequate safeguards. Any processing of biometric data aimed at the unambiguous identification of a natural person would be subjected to the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union, as it would be an exception to a prohibition established by European law. It follows that, in accordance with existing European data protection rules and the Charter of Fundamental Rights, AI can only be used for remote biometric identification purposes where such use is duly justified, proportionate and subject to adequate safeguards. In order to address any social concern regarding the use of AI for this purpose in public places and to avoid fragmentation of the internal market, the Commission will launch a wide-ranging European debate.